Hey everyone, it's Tripl-L here to talk about Vending Machine episode 3 and 4. I finally got done with all my work for the week, so I got to watch anime again. Anyway, hey everyone! So, what are we going to talk about? Well, I'm very excited to talk about Vending Machine. Not because of the content of the episode, but just, the little choices. If you've been watching my videos, you kind of know what I focus on a lot. And when it comes to the Vending Machine episode, I think they gave some really interesting points. We saw some stuff that we see in a lot of low-budget isekai, or like isekai that doesn't really hit the sale numbers of Shield Hero or even Sword Art Online. Although Sword Art Online is a different thing, but they don't hit the sale numbers of Shield Hero or Slime. So I'm very excited to talk about that. But before we get into like the critical analysis, let's just talk about the episodes in general. Overall, episode 3, going into it, it looked like this was just a pretty casual, just random little stories here and there. I can't imagine how this would have worked in the novel, just because, well, I feel like this makes sense from a web novel perspective, this kind of meandering that you saw in episode 3. And like, to be fair, he's like, you can tell that the writer's just kind of building little details here and there, like showing different aspects of the world off. So it's hard to criticize that. You can see the idea behind it, but I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, this probably wouldn't be well received. It just feels like a meandering part. Like if you were having critical reviews on Amazon, you'd probably have people pointing out that the middle part feels kind of slow. It kind of depends on how it executed in the novel. But for an episode overall, it definitely went more slice of lifey. So if you like that, that'll be fine. Like Vending Machine is a low budget show in the first place, and it's a feel good show, so I don't think that is too dangerous. But at the same time, you have episode 4, and episode 4 comes in with the hint of a longer plot, that being the wish of the Menagerie of Fools. So episode 3 is just kind of there, not really doing a lot of worthwhile stuff other than just building up some little character interactions. Again, though, if you're the kind of person that enjoys going with the flow, I think that'll be okay, and I feel like anyone that reads Vending Machine probably is that kind of audience or that kind of reader. So it shouldn't be a really big problem. In terms though, like episode 3 did have something that I found like just really interesting, and that was the stuff with the condom. I just legitimately did not expect that they would actually talk about it. I was really confused going into it because the guy's talking about like breeding patterns for your fiends, and it's good to know like bear fiend and all that. And I'm thinking like, nah, he's not gonna like segue into sexual health, and it's like, oh no, we're actually doing that. So that was kind of novel. That was pretty cool just to see. It's like, okay, sure, but it does open up other questions, which are what I'm more interested in. Before talking about that though, we go to episode 4. And episode 4 is significantly more interesting. We find out who the alchemist is. Now, from the construction of a novel, you can kind of see what's going on there. Like, if you're looking at it from a novel, assuming that episode 1 to 4 constitute one full novel, because, like, a plot line in episode 1 is followed up in episode 4. So you have some bookends there, right? You, like, set up in the beginning half. You have that guy that tried to mess with Boxo in the first place. And you have, like, the information about the alchemist. So those two things that were set up in episode 1 get answered in episode 4. So that was pretty neat. Looking at that there, you can see the very classical construction of how that works out for one volume. And overall, I like the alchemist girl. I think she's really neat. I'm glad we got to see her. I like her a lot more than Lammy, actually. And it was all right to see how they got away. Like, it was all right to see how Boxo got saved. One thing that I was thinking there is, like, when Boxo gave the perpetrators the distraction in the form of those dirty magazines, I really thought, like, they're very lucky that they live in a low fantasy or a light fantasy world, because, like, in a dark fantasy, if that was Overlord, those magazines wouldn't have stopped them from messing the girl up. So thankfully it's not Overlord, but again, we're in a very light fantasy setting. Other little details before I get into, like, the hard parts is, it was interesting episode 3 opening up with things getting destroyed and just showing us the life of living in a dungeon. I thought that was really good. In episode 4, was there any other little thing that was really good? No, episode 4 in general is just a strong episode, and it has the feeling of a volume ender because of the way things were constructed, and like because you have the promise of a bigger plot later on in the form of the Menagerie of Fools. Let me just check my notes real quick. Right, it was little features. Like, definitely one of the things that Vending Machine has going for it is the obscure knowledge about the different types of vending machines. The oxygen machine made sense. I see that. I know that there's oxygen bars in places that have really bad smog, so that made sense to me. It was cool to see the oxygen machine, and of course the condom machine makes sense. I've seen those everywhere in Canada as well, so that's not surprising. Overall, definitely some good little things here, and I'm happy that you can see that there is some kind of theory going into the first 4 episodes. I would bet this is one full volume in the 4 episodes, but I'd be very happy to be surprised. You never really know because some people can change up the formula a lot of times for these kind of things. All right, so going into the actual cool stuff, the writing decisions, the decisions that happened here. There's a lot of really interesting stuff. Okay, so first off, episode 3. The moment you do this, like, let's introduce modern marvels into an isekai world, things get really interesting because then you like start playing the game of like, well, does it make sense people's awareness of what's going on here? Because condoms have a really giant history in our human history. Ideas of condoms have been around since BC. And when it comes to condoms being used, like people have been using animal intestines for condoms. China and Japan were using condoms before Europe did. Europe like adopted them, I think, hardcore in the 1800s. This is just all very quick research I did, just seeing the history of condoms. So when you look at it, there's 2 layers here. First is like the invention of condoms and then the idea of condoms. There's a very different thing going on. Rubber condoms are definitely modern. Unless you have someone making rubber, they're not going to make a rubber condom, right? That's the cool thing. But it's really the girl's, it's really the lady when she's looking at it and her reaction that's really important. Because in certain societies, you would expect them to have, expected them to have developed contraceptive technology, and especially when you look at our world and you see that they had like glass condoms and all that kind of stuff, when you see all the development our world had with less technology and less magic, that's the other big issue, magic. That's usually the confounding factor. Because if you have magic, your development tree of your technologies is going to be fundamentally different. So the condoms by themselves, they offer a really interesting thing. One of the first things I think about, because they're thinking about like preventing diseases, and it was a really interesting argument, saying that more people coming in means more people are going to be shacking up randomly because that's what people do. And okay, fair enough. I do wonder if they know about washing their hands, because washing their hands for our world, that happened relatively late for what was really a simple thing to do: wash your hands. I wonder if they know about that. But like, if they're thinking about contraceptives, then they must know something about that. But one of the interesting things here that makes things a little bit more difficult is the presence of sunglasses in Vending machine. Specifically the bodyguards that are with that girl that wants box or whatever. That kind of glass, or how you make those sunglasses, is a really interesting little situation here. So I would say that the development of the sunglasses, even though it's not the same development tree as, say, rubber, it's just, well, that kind of sunglasses only really come into our world 1800s, 1900s, if I recall correctly. Now, mind you, in our world, we have earlier variations of sunglasses, like I think Emperor Nero, if I recall correctly, had emerald for his glasses to like improve his vision. The Chinese in the old days also used like cloudy glasses to obscure the faces of judges. So sunglasses have definitely been in our world, and they seem to have a bigger footprint than contraceptives do. But it's just really interesting because like you see a very modern technology and you have this other really modern technology, and there's a juxtaposition going on there, or there's a clash there that you kind of wish was a little bit more resolved. Now, mind you, this is a low budget, low fantasy isekai. It's not hitting like high notes, so like to some degree there's no point really criticizing it. Now this doesn't really matter to you guys because you guys are probably just anime readers, because you guys are probably just anime watchers, maybe manga readers, light novel readers. If you were doing a web serial on Royal Road and you had this kind of shenanigan going on where you have like the presence of rubber condoms being brought into the world, but you somehow have sunglasses on the other side, that would set off the most critical readers, which Royal Road is full of. So if you were doing a web serial, that would not be a good website to do that kind of thing on. If you were working on Scribble Hub, that's a little bit different because they're a little bit more lax, or like people are nicer there. They're not as critical. if you're looking where this thing came from, if you're looking at the Japanese web serial site, so you want to be a novelist or something like that, given that so many of the low-budget isekais come from that website, I want to believe that the commenters on that website are nicer in general. But overall, this kind of shenanigan, very dangerous, depending on how critical the website you're sharing it on is. Now, on a greater note, like there is a reason Vending Machine, by all accounts, is a low-budget isekai. It's because like it doesn't really have that depth. It doesn't have that depth that really draws people in. It doesn't have that potential. There's a reason it's not Slime. There's a reason it's not Shield Hero. Like if you look at Shield Hero and you look at Slime, both of those series really respect the isekai world that they're in. Whereas this is just more demonstration of a modern guy coming into like a low fantasy world. Other little notes can get involved there with the condoms that you can like argue if you want to defend whatever's happening there. Like condoms were more used by people in nobility, but when you have really nicely dressed people showing up, and the merchant class tend to be nobles as well, so like, you know, it gets really messy. But overall, those are like the things that jump out at me when we're looking at episode 3. Episode 4 also has its share of problems, and it's always in the little details, because it's the little details that show how much thought went into the world before the story starts. Because there's two kinds of writers. There's pantsers and there's planners. Pantsers pretty much just do things by the seat of their pants, you know, like they're just whatever happens, happens. And actually, an example of that is that you have Lamis, right? She's in a story, and you find out that, oh, the people in this town never knew how to use Lamis properly. If she did physical labor from the beginning, things would have been different. You're telling me that no one figured out that a girl with a strength blessing would be good at physical labor? Is that what you're implying to me? Are you crazy? But the reason that comes about is probably because the first couple chapters got written, and there wasn't the past of those characters wasn't really well developed. So you don't have the logical follow-throughs that would come from a really developed situation. You just put Lamis in there, and then you have to like justify why it is that she was so underutilized before Boxo shows up. And mind you, like Boxo being there doesn't change anything for her, not in terms of like people realizing she could work for physical labor. If this place is getting attacked by monsters so often, there should be a lot of physical labor to go around. So that's like one thing there, and that it usually happens because you get into the story and you realize that there were some details that weren't fleshed out when you like started it. You just need Lamis to be in a particular position for the story to start. So, you know, it happens. It happens. It's a normal thing. It's just one of the weaknesses. It's also like it's indicative of a low budget isekai the way that this one is. Going into episode 4. So Alchemist Girl was pretty cool, but the little detail that really sticks out in episode 4 is that Boxo thinks it's really impressive that she had a thought about a soul being inside of an object. That is not impressive. That is not an impressive thought. That is insane that you could even think that's an impressive thought. And mind you, like, I'm having fun. But the reason that that's not impressive is because the idea of souls being stuck inside of objects is super old. We have Hylozoism in this world. We're like talking like BC era. Like the idea of people's souls getting stuck in objects is the stuff of mythology. This is not an impressive idea. So what happens here is that you have a low fantasy world. You have a low technology world. Usually when scientific development is not very high, superstition runs like crazy. Now mind you, their science is developed towards the direction of magical science. But in a world where there's magic, you would think like, okay, maybe like because they understand magic, they believe so and so. But at the same time, like the development, like your knowledge of magic doesn't go from 0 to 100 in the span of 1 year. This is a consistent thing, such that it's kind of ridiculous to say that you wouldn't have the idea of a soul being inside of an object. That would at least be in your mythology. Now, like the bigger note here is that again, this is a low fantasy or a light fantasy, and it's a low budget isekai. Now, when you look at the isekai that tend to get like really big numbers in their light novel volumes, it's usually the ones that have a lot of depth. If we think about it, like think about like some of the big ones like Shield Hero, Mushoku Tensei, and Slime, Overlord as well. These are the big guys in the isekai genre, and they all have to some degree developed mythologies. Slime has a very developed mythology. Overlord has, if I recall correctly, a good enough mythology. Shield Hero relies on the legends of the past to inform the present of Shield Hero. And which one was what other one did I have in there? It doesn't really matter. Oh, I guess you could put ReZero in there because ReZero has a really developed mythology as well. The big thing here is that one thing you'll see with the really cheap isekais is that there's not a lot of thought really given to the background mythology in the world. And usually what that causes, when you have someone that went out of their way to think about what do the legends of this world do to the plot, you end up with something a little bit more robust, and it prevents ideas like that. Like, ultimately, Shield Hero is not a story that would ever have that kind of line in there because Shield Hero respects the other world way too much. So that was like one of the things here. Like, it's again indicative. Like, there's a reason that this is a low budget isekai, because like they probably don't think it's gonna like actually hit really high milestones in terms of sales. But these are the elements of it. Now, mind you, you can have a really light fantasy like Vending Machine and also still do like really crazy sales. If what you're showing there is ultimately entertaining, you're going to do really well. But we're talking about odds. These are the hallmarks of lower end isekai that don't have high sales potential, and that's why they get those kind of adaptations. If that had a higher potential for sales, they would have given more money to it, more often than not. But like that's just the way the game works, in my opinion. I say my opinion, but like, please rest assured, I have looked at a lot of the light novel volume sales and whatnot to know what the numbers are for like some of the big ones. Regardless, when you look at that little statement there, it just, or how much of a low knowledge base that particular world has. But again, not a problem. This is just the setting for the isekai. It's a low power, low intelligence world. Nothing wrong with that. It's a world that needs to be there for a vending machine to be able to flourish in it. In the end of the day, if it's fun, right? Overall, though, episode 3 and 4, I really enjoyed it. I like seeing the things I saw. I like seeing the little elements. I like seeing some of the writing choices that went into it. It continues to be a very casual, fun kind of thing. I like the alchemist girl more than I thought I would, so that was pretty awesome. It's always good to have someone who is relatively competent. Guys, let me know what you thought down below, and till next time, I hope you have an absolutely great day.